The FDA? This is an internal company matter. Richard's face had gone completely white. I maintained my composure as the FDA agents took their seats at the conference table, watching Elizabeth Harris's practice CEO smile fracture around the edges. All the sleepless nights of the past week crystallized into this perfect moment of reckoning. Actually, one of the agents replied calmly. Deliberate tampering with systems that manage pharmaceutical trial data falls squarely within our jurisdiction. Ms. Lynn contacted our office with evidence suggesting serious compliance violations. I caught Samantha's eye across the room. Her slight nod told me everything I needed to know. She was ready. We had both been manipulated, but today the truth would finally come to light. 1 week earlier, we can pay her half your salary, Richard laughed, leaning back in his chair. It's just business, Diana, nothing personal. I stared at him across his desk, the birthday card my colleagues had signed for me just hours earlier still tucked in my purse. My fingers tightened around the leather strap as I fought to keep my expression neutral. Inside, a storm was brewing. Confusion, betrayal, and something dangerously close to rage. Look, Samantha's been here 6 months now. You've trained her well. The pharmaceutical database system is running smoothly, and frankly, we don't need two people doing one job. The moment seemed surreal. Just 90 minutes ago, I'd been in the office break room, surrounded by colleagues singing Happy Birthday, a small store-bought cake with 41 candles blazing. Now here I was, being told I was redundant. My mind flashed to my apartment's second bedroom, converted into a makeshift office where I'd spend countless evenings refining the very system he was now dismissing so casually. The mortgage payment due next week. The college fund for Jenny I'd been carefully building over the years. The thought of telling my 17-year-old daughter that our plans might need to change. Samantha knows the basics, I said slowly, fighting to keep my voice steady, but she doesn't understand the integration points, the system architecture. Richard waved his hand dismissively. All documented in your process manuals, right? That's what I pay you for. Besides, young talent brings fresh perspectives. The industry is evolving. The industry is evolving. The words hung in the air between us, their meaning clear. At 41, I was considered obsolete. Childhood memory. My father had been an engineer at Boeing for 32 years before they restructured his department. I was 16 when he came home early that Tuesday, his security badge still hanging from his belt, his eyes vacant. They said younger engineers work for less. He told my mother that night, when they thought I couldn't hear. They said my methods were outdated. He never found another engineering position. Within a year, he was working at a hardware store, explaining to customers how to install ceiling fans and repair leaky faucets, his expertise in aviation stress testing wasted. I had promised myself then that I would never be caught off guard like that I would always stay ahead of the curve, continuously learning, making myself indispensable. That I would build a secure future for Jenny, ensuring she would never experience the financial instability that followed my father's layoff. Yet here I was, being shown the door on my birthday, just like my father had been all those years ago. The architecture. My name is Diana Lynn, 41 years old, and until 5 minutes ago, I was the Senior Database Integration Specialist at Pharmatech Solutions for 3 years. I designed and maintained the complex system that tracked drug trials across multiple platforms, connecting research data with regulatory submission requirements for pharmaceutical companies across the country. When Richard hired Samantha 6 months ago, I'd welcomed the help. The system had grown increasingly complex, and having someone manage the day-to-day operations would free me up to implement improvements I'd been planning for months. I'd spent countless hours training her, carefully walking her through the standard procedures, though there hadn't been time to cover the underlying architecture, the invisible connective tissue that made everything work seamlessly. What Samantha couldn't yet see, what Richard certainly couldn't comprehend, was that the architecture wasn't just code and databases. It was a living ecosystem, designed with multiple redundancies and verification protocols that seemed excessive until the moment they weren't. Until the moment they prevented a catastrophic data error that could compromise patient safety during clinical trials. I signed the agreement mechanically, then stood up. Samantha will need the emergency protocols for when systems don't synchronize properly. They're not in the documentation. I'm sure she'll figure it out, Richard replied, already checking his phone. She's quite resourceful. Richard's background. As I walked back to my desk, I recalled the day Richard had been introduced as our new department head a year ago. The previous director, Dr. Michaels, had been a scientist at heart, methodical, respectful of data integrity, understanding the critical nature of our work. Richard had been different from the start. His introduction email had been full of business jargon, optimizing workflows, streamlining operations, maximizing return on investment. There had been whispers in the hallways. He'd made his reputation as a turnaround specialist at 3 previous companies, a hatchet man who could quickly cut costs and boost short-term profits before moving on to his next challenge. His LinkedIn profile boasted of his MBA from a prestigious Chicago business school, but listed no technical qualifications. In our first meeting, he proudly told me how his father, a senior VP at a Fortune 500 company, had taught him that business is about numbers, not people. At the time, I thought it was just corporate talk. Now I understood it was his actual philosophy. When he hired Samantha, fresh out of graduate school with a computer science degree but no real-world experience, I didn't object. Training a junior colleague seemed reasonable, and I enjoyed sharing my knowledge. Samantha was eager and quick to learn the operational procedures, though she sometimes grew impatient with details. Do we really need to run all these verification queries? She'd ask. It adds an hour to the process. That hour prevents weeks of potential disaster recovery, I'd explain. The system is more fragile than it appears. The departure, as I packed my desk, Samantha approached, her expression a mixture of sympathy and awkwardness. I'm really sorry, she whispered. I had no idea this was happening. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She looked impossibly young, reminding me of myself 15 years ago. Eager, confident, unaware of the corporate politics swirling around her. I wondered briefly if she realized she was being set up to fail. As I handed her my system notebook, a notification popped up on my computer screen. Database sync error on client trial DRX1 to 1429 manual resolution required. I started to explain the error, but Richard appeared, ushering me toward the exit. Samantha's got this, he said firmly. It's time for you to go. I smiled tightly. Good luck, I said, meaning it more sincerely than either of them could possibly understand. Walking through the parking lot to my car, I felt oddly light, as if I'd shed something heavy. The spring breeze carried the scent of blooming cherry trees from the corporate landscaping. A birthday present from the universe, perhaps, reminding me that regardless of corporate decisions, life continues its cycles of renewal. I didn't know then that my phone would start ringing within 24 hours. That Pharmatech's carefully balanced system was already beginning its cascading failure. That within a week, I would be sitting across from Richard, Elizabeth, and FDA agents, watching as their carefully constructed plans imploded spectacularly. I only knew that for the moment, I needed to drive home, check on Jenny's college applications, and begin updating my resume. Mother and daughter, that evening, I sat with Jenny at our kitchen table, takeout containers between us. I had planned to cook a nice birthday dinner, but after the day's events, neither of us had the energy. So they just fired you? On your birthday? Jenny's dark eyes, so much like my own, flashed with indignation. At 17, her sense of justice was absolute, uncomplicated by the compromises adulthood forces upon us. They eliminated my position, I corrected gently, using air quotes. It's nothing personal, just business. That's complete garbage, Jenny said, stabbing at her pad thai. After everything you did for them? You literally built their whole system. I smiled at her loyalty. The corporate world doesn't always reward past contributions, honey. They're focused on future costs. So what happens now? She asked, the teenage bravado momentarily slipping to reveal the worry beneath. Are we going to be okay? What I didn't tell her was how the severance package would impact our finances. How the college visits we'd planned to our top choice schools might need to be scaled back. How the carefully mapped future I'd been building for us had suddenly shifted beneath my feet. Instead, I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. It'll be okay. I've got options. This field is specialized enough that experienced architects are always in demand. Jenny looked unconvinced. Mom, you always do this. You always pretend everything's fine, even when it's not. Her perception struck me. It was true. I had developed this habit during the divorce, when Jenny was just 10, shielding her from my fears and uncertainties. Always projecting confidence, even when I felt anything but confident. You're right, I admitted. I'm scared and angry, but I also know my worth. They'll realize what they've lost, probably sooner than they think. I had no idea then just how prophetic those words would prove to be. The system fails. The next morning, I woke to a string of LinkedIn notifications. News of my departure had apparently spread quickly through professional circles. 3 former colleagues had sent messages expressing shock and asking if I was looking for new opportunities. I spent the day updating my resume and researching positions, trying to focus on the future rather than dwelling on the humiliation of being escorted from the building on my birthday. By evening, I'd lined up 2 promising interviews for later in the week. The pharmaceutical data integration field was specialized enough that experienced architects were always in demand. I had just finished preparing dinner when my phone rang. It was Jason, a developer from my former team at Pharmatech. Diana, I know you probably don't want to talk about work, but I'm stuck on something, he said, his voice tight with stress. The Derek's 1429 trial database is showing inconsistencies after the routine Sunday update. I've tried everything in your documentation, but nothing's working. I remembered the error notification I'd seen just before leaving. Did you run the verification sequence on the secondary tables? I asked. Yes, but the systems aren't reconciling. Samantha said to just force an override, but that doesn't seem right. I winced. Definitely don't do that. It could corrupt the entire trial data set. That's what I thought, Jason sighed. I told Richard we should call you, but he said we needed to handle it internally. After providing some guidance, careful not to violate the confidentiality agreement I'd signed, I hung up feeling a curious mix of vindication and concern. The system I'd built was intricate, with carefully designed fail-safes and interconnection points that weren't immediately obvious without understanding the underlying architecture. 2 more calls came in that evening from different team members, each describing escalating problems. Apparently, Samantha had indeed attempted to force an override, which had triggered cascading errors across multiple client databases. The team was now in emergency mode, trying to prevent data corruption from spreading. I declined to answer the 4th call, which came from Richard's number just before midnight. New opportunities. The next morning, a Tuesday, I had an early interview with Metasearch Data, one of Pharmatech's competitors. The hiring manager, impressed with my portfolio, asked why I'd left my previous position. Restructuring, I said simply. They decided to streamline the database management team. He looked skeptical. Interesting timing. We just heard Pharmatech is having major system issues. Something about corrupted trial data. I kept my expression neutral. I wouldn't know. I'm no longer with the company. By Wednesday, I had received official offers from both Metasearch Data and another competitor, each with significantly higher salaries than what I'd made at Pharmatech. A third company requested an interview, mentioning they'd heard excellent things about my architecture skills. Meanwhile, my phone continued to accumulate missed calls from Richard and other Pharmatech numbers. I didn't return them. By Thursday morning, my curiosity got the better of me. I accepted Richard's call on the first ring. Tina, he said, relief evident in his voice. Thank God. We have a situation. So I've heard, I replied neutrally. Look, I'll be direct. The system is in complete meltdown. After that initial error on Monday, everything started falling apart. Client dashboards are showing incorrect data, trial records are mismatched, and the regulatory submission module is flagging compliance errors across the board. I closed my eyes, visualizing the cascade of failures. Exactly what I designed the verification protocols to prevent. Richard, I signed a severance agreement. I'm no longer an employee. I understand that, he said quickly. We bring you back as a consultant, name your rate. We just need you to fix this. The offer was tempting, not for the money, but for the satisfaction of being proven right. However, I knew better than to rush into anything. I'd need full system access and complete autonomy to implement solutions, I said. Absolutely, Richard agreed immediately. Whatever you need. I'll think about it and get back to you this afternoon. After hanging up, I called Jason for an unofficial assessment of the situation. His description confirmed my suspicions. Samantha had implemented emergency fixes that had only worsened the problems, not understanding how each system interconnected with the others. It's bad, Diana, Jason said quietly. Pharmadane is threatening to pull their contract. That's 30% of the company's revenue, and there's talk about potential legal action if trial data has been compromised. I spent the morning weighing my options. The professional part of me wanted to rescue the system I'd built. The human part of me felt a certain satisfaction in Richard's desperation. By noon, I'd made my decision and called him back. I'll help, I said. My consulting rate is $300 an hour, with a minimum engagement of 40 hours, payable up front. Richard didn't even hesitate. Done. When can you start? I'll be there in an hour. Return as consultant. Walking back into Pharmatech felt surreal. Colleagues greeted me with obvious relief, while Richard hovered anxiously nearby. Samantha was noticeably absent. Where's Samantha? I asked as Richard escorted me to a workstation. She called in sick today, he said, not meeting my eyes. The stress of the situation. I logged into the system with the admin credentials Richard provided and began my assessment. The damage was extensive but followed a logical pattern. Exactly what happens when someone who doesn't understand the architecture tries to force solutions without addressing the underlying issues. By late afternoon, I had stabilized the most critical systems and developed a recovery plan for the rest. Richard checked in frequently, each time more relieved as progress became evident. You're a lifesaver, he said during one such visit. I don't know what we were thinking letting you go. I continued working without responding. The comment wasn't worth acknowledging. As I was preparing to leave for the day, Richard approached with a folder. I've been authorized to offer you your job back, he said, pushing the documents toward me, with a 15% raise and a more senior title. I glanced at the offer letter without touching it. I'll consider it after we resolve the current crisis, of course. He nodded eagerly. Take your time. But as I gathered my things, I noticed an email on Richard's open laptop on the desk beside me. It was from the CEO, with the subject line Transition Plan. The visible preview text read, Get everything documented properly this time before we make any changes. I felt a chill. They weren't offering my job back out of recognition of my value. They simply needed me to repair the system and document everything so thoroughly that even Samantha could maintain it. Then they discard me again. The decision I thought I had was just another illusion. The truth revealed. The next morning, I arrived early to continue my recovery work. The system was responding well to my corrections, and I estimated another 2 or 3 days before everything would be fully functional again. I worked methodically, carefully documenting each step, not for Richard's future transition plan, but for my own records. Around midday, the CEO, Elizabeth Harris, stopped by my workstation. Diana, I can't tell you how pleased we are that you've returned to help us through this crisis, she said warmly. Richard speaks very highly of your expertise. I nodded politely, continuing to type. The system should be stable by Monday. Wonderful. And I understand Richard has discussed your potential return to a permanent position. He mentioned it, I replied, keeping my focus on the screen. Elizabeth's smile tightened slightly at my lukewarm response. Well, we'd be delighted to have you back on the team. Perhaps once this situation is resolved, we could discuss the specifics over lunch. Perhaps, I agreed, non-committal. After she left, I took a short break, stepping outside for fresh air. As I scrolled through my phone, a message appeared from an unfamiliar number. Diana, it's Samantha. Can we talk? It's important. Curious, I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop across the street during my lunch break. When I arrived, Samantha was already there, looking pale and nervous. Thank you for coming, she said as I sat down. I've been trying to decide whether to tell you this. Tell me what? Samantha glanced around before leaning forward. The system failure wasn't an accident, at least not entirely. I felt my body go still. Explain. Richard asked me to implement some optimizations to the system last week, changes that would streamline the verification processes. He said you had approved the concept but were too busy to implement it yourself. I never approved any such changes, I said, my voice tight. I realized that later, Samantha admitted. When things started going wrong on Monday, I told Richard we needed to call you immediately. He refused, saying it would validate your overcomplicated approach and that we could fix it ourselves. She pulled out her phone and showed me a text exchange with Richard from Monday morning. His messages clearly instructed her to attempt fixes without contacting me, even as she expressed increasing concern about the escalating problems. By the time he finally decided to call you, I was having panic attacks. I couldn't sleep knowing what we'd done to the system, what I'd done by trusting him. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Samantha's eyes filled with tears. Because they're planning to blame me for everything. Yesterday, HR called me in and said they're conducting an investigation into procedural violations that led to the system failure. Richard told them I made unauthorized changes against his instructions. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Richard had deliberately undermined the system architecture I'd built, likely to prove that his streamlined approach was superior. When everything collapsed, he needed me to fix it. But afterward, Samantha would take the fall, and he would emerge as the manager who handled the crisis. I have the job offer from MetaSearch, Samantha continued. I was going to accept it before all this happened. Now Richard's threatening to give me a negative reference if I leave. He says he'll make sure I can't work in pharmaceutical data anywhere. I felt a surge of anger, not just for myself now, but for Samantha too. She was younger and inexperienced, but she didn't deserve to be manipulated and scapegoated. Forward me those texts, I said, my mind racing, and any other communications you have about the system changes. The evidence. As Samantha compiled the evidence, I realized I had a decision to make. I could walk away with my consulting fee and one of my new job offers, leaving Pharmatech to its toxic culture, or I could take action that might help Samantha, and perhaps other employees, while exposing Richard's sabotage. The choice was obvious. Back at Pharmatech, I continued the recovery work with renewed purpose. While my hands fixed the technical issues, my mind developed a different kind of solution. What I needed was irrefutable evidence of Richard's deliberate actions, evidence that couldn't be dismissed as a misunderstanding or technical confusion. I recalled something Jason had mentioned. All system changes were automatically logged on a secure server for regulatory compliance purposes. Those logs would show exactly who had authorized the optimizations and when they were implemented. During a moment when the office was mostly empty, I accessed the compliance server and found what I was looking for. The logs clearly showed Richard had used his administrative override to approve significant changes to the verification protocols, changes that directly contradicted the system architecture documentation. Most damning of all, he had backdated the approval to make it appear these changes had been pending for weeks, implying my tacit acceptance. I downloaded the logs to a secure drive and then sent myself an encrypted email with the files attached. For good measure, I took screenshots showing the timestamps of the original changes versus the backdated approvals. Now I needed to understand who else was involved. Had Elizabeth known about Richard's plan to sabotage the system, or was she merely complicit in using the crisis as an opportunity to rehire me temporarily? The answer came unexpectedly when Richard's calendar notification popped up on his laptop during our afternoon status meeting. Discuss DL transition plan with F 4:30 p.m. I need a bit more time on the regulatory module, I told Richard. Probably another hour. You go ahead to your meeting. Once he left, I quickly finished my work on the system, then set up one final safety measure, a hidden diagnostic tool that would alert me to any unauthorized changes to the core architecture, sending notifications directly to my personal email. It wasn't technically part of my consulting agreement, but I justified it as professional due diligence. At 5:15 p.m., I packed up my things and prepared to leave for the weekend. The system was now 80% recovered, with only minor issues remaining that I could resolve remotely. As I passed the conference room, I heard Richard's voice rising in frustration. But she's fixing everything. Can't we at least wait until Monday before? Elizabeth's response was cool and clear. The decision is made. Once she submits the final documentation, We thank her for her consulting work and proceed with the transition to the simplified architecture. Samantha was just a trial run. We've already identified another junior developer who can maintain the streamlined system at an even lower salary point. And if it fails again, it won't matter because Diana will have documented every aspect of the recovery process. That's the whole point of bringing her back as a consultant. I'd heard enough. I slipped away before they could exit the conference room, a strange calm settling over me. I now had all the evidence I needed and a weekend to decide exactly how to use it. The plan: Sunday evening, I received a text from Richard. System looking stable. Just need final documentation tomorrow to close out your consulting engagement. CEO wants to meet at 9 a.m. I responded simply, I'll be there. What Richard didn't know was that I'd spent the weekend consulting with both a labor attorney and a regulatory compliance expert at the FDA, who had expressed significant concern about the deliberate manipulation of pharmaceutical trial data systems. I had also accepted the position at Metasearch Data with a specific condition they had happily accommodated. Monday morning would bring answers to questions Richard and Elizabeth didn't even know to ask, and I would be ready. I arrived at Pharmatech at exactly 9 a.m. Monday, carrying a slim portfolio containing my consulting invoice and several other carefully prepared documents. Elizabeth's executive assistant showed me into the conference room, where Elizabeth, Richard, and two people I didn't recognize, a woman in a severe suit and a nervous-looking man with a legal pad, were already seated. Diana, thank you for coming, Elizabeth began with practiced warmth. This is Patricia from HR, and Jonathan from legal. They're here to formalize the conclusion of your consulting engagement. I smiled pleasantly. How convenient. I've brought some documentation that requires legal review as well. Before anyone could respond, the conference room door opened again. Jason entered, followed by Samantha and two men in dark suits who definitely weren't Pharmatech employees. What is the meaning of this? Elizabeth demanded, half rising from her chair. I invited a few additional participants, I said calmly. Jason and Samantha have first-hand knowledge relevant to our discussion, and these gentlemen are from the FDA's Office of Regulatory Compliance. They're very interested in the events of the past week. The color drained from Richard's face. The FDA? This is an internal company matter. Actually, one of the agents interrupted. Deliberate tampering with systems that manage pharmaceutical trial data falls squarely within our jurisdiction. Ms. Lynn contacted our office with evidence suggesting serious compliance violations. I opened my portfolio and distributed copies of a comprehensive report detailing the system architecture, the unauthorized changes, the attempted cover-up, and the impact on client data integrity. The final page contained my sworn statement and signature. This constitutes my final documentation as requested, I said, sliding the original across to Elizabeth. I've also accepted a position with Metasearch Data starting tomorrow. My first assignment is implementing a rescue plan for all Pharmatech clients who wish to transfer their data to a more stable platform. Elizabeth's composure finally cracked. You can't do this. Those clients are under contract. Contracts with specific performance guarantees regarding data integrity, I corrected her. Guarantees you've breached. My attorney has already reviewed the relevant clauses. The FDA agents began asking pointed questions about change management protocols and verification procedures. As the interrogation continued, I quietly excused myself, nodding to Jason and Samantha. My work here was finished. Epilogue: 6 months later, I sat in my new corner office at Metasearch Data reviewing the quarterly performance report. The transition of former Pharmatech clients had gone remarkably smoothly, thanks in part to Jason and Samantha, who had both joined me at the new company. The industry newsletter on my desk contained a small item noting that Pharmatech had been acquired by a larger competitor after experiencing significant client attrition and regulatory challenges. Richard and Elizabeth had both pursued other opportunities following an FDA investigation into data integrity violations. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder, a video meeting with our newest pharmaceutical client, formerly Pharmatech's largest account. Their research director had specifically requested that I oversee their data architecture personally, citing my exceptional reputation for system integrity. As I prepared for the call, Samantha knocked on my doorframe. The team wanted me to remind you about the celebration dinner tonight, she said. 1 year since we all started here. I smiled, remembering the day I'd negotiated with MetaSearch's CEO to bring both Jason and Samantha onto my team as part of my employment conditions. He'd been skeptical until I explained their potential value and their loyalty in providing evidence that helped expose Pharmatech's violations. I wouldn't miss it, I assured her. My new email notification chimed. The diagnostic system I'd created was alerting me that all client databases had completed their verification cycle successfully. The architecture I designed here was even more robust than my work at Pharmatech, incorporating lessons learned from that experience. As Samantha turned to leave, my personal phone buzzed with a text message from Jenny. Got the campus tour scheduled for Friday. Still okay to come with me? Absolutely, I replied, feeling a wave of contentment. Wouldn't miss it for anything. Some might view what happened at Pharmatech as revenge, but I saw it differently. It was simply the natural consequence of valuing systems over the people who built them, of prioritizing short-term savings over expertise and integrity. In the end, I hadn't needed to destroy Pharmatech. Their own short-sightedness had done that quite effectively without my help. I closed the performance report and prepared to meet with our new client, ready to demonstrate once again the value of doing things right, both in data architecture and in how we treat the people behind the technology. Could you describe the events that led to your identification of these compliance violations? The question hangs in the air of the packed hearing room. Cameras flash. I can feel the weight of the nation watching through television screens. Across the room, Dr. Richard Harlow, once my superior, now a defendant, stares at me with undisguised hatred. 6 months ago, I was being publicly fired in front of my colleagues. Today, I'm testifying before Congress about one of the biggest scientific fraud cases in recent medical history. My name is Ellen Morgan. I'm 57 years old, and this is how I lost everything, and then found something more valuable. 3 days after the firing, the evidence is spread across my kitchen table like the pieces of a disturbing puzzle. Lab notes, security logs, and chemical storage records. Each document tells part of a story of scientific fraud that could put patients' lives at risk. My phone buzzes. It's Amy, my daughter, video calling from college. Mom, you look terrible. Have you slept at all? I force a smile. I'm fine, sweetheart. You're not fine. I can see it in your eyes. Amy's face grows serious. What are you going to do about those people who fired you? My fingers trace the edge of a falsified trial report. The question isn't what I'm going to do about them. It's what I'm going to do about what they're doing. 6 months earlier, the beginning. They say you never see the bullet that kills you. In my case, it was a quarterly staff meeting on a Tuesday morning. This is utterly unacceptable, Ellen. Your negligence has cost us millions. Dr. Richard Harlow's voice boomed through the conference room, bouncing off the sterile white walls. 24 pairs of eyes bored into me. Colleagues I'd worked alongside for years suddenly found the table fascinating. The navy blue blazer I'd worn, the same one from my first day 17 years ago, suddenly felt too tight, constricting. My breath caught in my chest. The National Institutes of Health Grant Committee has cited significant irregularities in compliance documentation as their reason for rescinding our funding, Harlow continued, his thin lips barely containing his fury. $8.4 million gone. His fist slammed against the polished conference table. I wanted to defend myself. The words formed in my throat but died before reaching my lips. This wasn't about finding truth. This was about finding a scapegoat. For 17 years, I had served as the Clinical Research Quality Management Director at Meridian Medical Research Center. I'd started as a nurse, worked my way up through clinical trials, and eventually became the guardian of our scientific integrity. After my divorce 12 years ago, this lab became my second home as I worked overtime to pay for Amy's education. Due to these compliance failures tied to our recent grant loss, Ellen Morgan is no longer with the company, Harlow announced with clinical detachment. Her office will be cleared by end of day. Without a word, I rose from my seat, straightened my blazer, and walked out. My footsteps echoed down the hallway toward my office as whispers erupted behind me. Flashback, the warning signs. The warning signs had been building since Axiom Pharmaceuticals acquired our labs 6 months ago. Harlow had once been idealistic, I remembered him from conferences years ago, passionate about cancer research. But something had changed. His third divorce had coincided with Axiom's arrival, and suddenly he became a yes man to corporate demands. We're streamlining operations, he'd announced in his first meeting after the acquisition. What he meant was quantity over quality, deadlines over integrity, profits over patience. I'd started keeping my own records then. Call it professional paranoia or just good sense, but I'd maintained a private ledger of every deviation from standard procedure I'd observed since the merger. 17 years of nursing had taught me one thing: document everything. Back to the firing day. As I cleared my desk, placing awards and photographs into a cardboard box, a soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Ellen, do you need any help? I looked up to see Jason Garcia, a young data analyst I'd trained 3 years ago. The son of Mexican immigrants, he'd worked his way through college on scholarships. His expression was a mixture of concern and fear. Thank you, Jason, but I'm almost finished. I offered him a reassuring smile. Just make sure you keep detailed records of everything you do, especially when it involves the chemical storage logs. His eyes widened slightly. Is that what this is about? The chemical logs? Among other things, I replied carefully. Just protect yourself, Jason. After he left, I unlocked my bottom drawer and removed a plain black notebook, my personal ledger. Inside were dates, times, and observations that contradicted the official records, particularly those concerning Dr. Sarah Patterson's accelerated arthritis treatment trials. Dr. Patterson, 35, brilliant, ambitious, and terrified. I'd seen the photos on her desk. Twin toddlers, no wedding ring. I understood her fear all too well. The terror of being a single mother, of failing your children. I slipped the notebook into my bag and took one last look around the office. At the door, I turned out the light and whispered a quiet goodbye to the place that had defined so much of who I was, or rather, who I had been. At home, the revelation. That evening, I spread my evidence across the kitchen table. A timeline emerged, showing precisely when the integrity of our research began to falter. It started 3 months ago when Dr. Patterson initiated a new trial protocol for an experimental arthritis treatment. According to standard procedure, certain chemicals required specialized containment and could only be used in specific quantities over controlled time periods. But the official log showed impossibly short intervals between usage, a clear violation of safety protocols. My hands trembled as anger and betrayal washed over me. My mother had been a nurse too, working the night shift for 30 years to give me opportunities she never had. Ellen, she told me once, in medicine, there's no room for shortcuts. Every step you skip might be the one that saves a life. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jason. Everyone's in shock. They're already interviewing replacements for you. Patterson seems nervous. Good, I thought. She should be nervous. I opened my laptop. With methodical precision, I began organizing the evidence. First, a detailed letter to the Institutional Ethics Board outlining the falsified data and naming those responsible. Then, a comprehensive report for the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. By midnight, both documents were complete. I walked to the window, looking out at the quiet Toledo street. Tomorrow would change everything. Flashback, early career. I began at Meridian when it was still a small, independent research facility. Dr. Margaret Sullivan, our founder, was a pioneer in cancer research. She'd broken glass ceilings in the 1970s when women scientists were rare. Patience produces precision, she would say, adjusting her spectacles as she reviewed our findings. Never rush good science. When I was going through my divorce, she'd been my rock. Ellen, she told me, you're not just tracking protocols. You're protecting patients. Never forget that. When Dr. Sullivan retired 5 years ago, things began to change. Then came the acquisition by Axiom Pharmaceuticals. The morning after, morning light filtered through my kitchen blinds as I sipped coffee and reviewed my documents one last time. Each allegation was backed by evidence. Each claim could be independently verified. I thought of Amy, working her way through college, dreaming of becoming a doctor. What example would I set if I walked away from this? I sent both emails within minutes of each other, first to the ethics board, then to OSHA. The weight that lifted from my shoulders was immediate and profound. My phone rang almost immediately. The caller ID showed Meridian. I let it go to voicemail. Then another call, Harlow's personal number. I silenced that too. I dressed carefully, sliding my arms into the sleeves of my blazer with deliberate movements. In my bag, I placed a sealed envelope containing printed copies of everything I had sent electronically. Then I drove to the laboratory one last time. Confrontation. The receptionist looked startled when I walked in. Ms. Morgan? I thought. We were told. I'm just dropping something off, Diane, I said with a calm smile, handing her the sealed envelope. Please ensure this reaches the board of directors. As I turned to leave, I saw Dr. Patterson hurrying down the hallway toward me, her face tight with concern. Ellen, wait, she called out. I paused, allowing her to catch up. Up close, I could see the dark circles under her eyes, the strain etched into her features. Can we talk? She asked, her voice low and urgent. I don't think we have anything to discuss, Dr. Patterson, I replied evenly. Please, she insisted, glancing nervously toward Harlow's office. What happened yesterday wasn't right. I tried to speak up, but you chose to remain silent, I finished for her. Just as you chose to falsify those chemical storage logs. Just as you chose to use my credentials to approve documentation. Her face paled. How did you? 17 years, Dr. Patterson. 17 years of watching people come and go. 17 years of knowing every system, every protocol, every audit trail in this laboratory. I kept my voice level. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? It was Harlow, she whispered, her eyes darting around. He said we needed those results fast-tracked for the quarterly report to Axiom. He said you were being difficult, slowing everything down with unnecessary checks. I thought of her twins, the photos on her desk. I'd been there, the impossible choices a single mother faces. But some lines can't be crossed. We all have choices, Sarah, I said softly, using her first name. You chose your twins. I understand that. But I chose the patients who would have received potentially dangerous medications based on falsified data. What have you done? She asked, her voice barely audible. My job, I answered simply. The one I've always done, whether anyone appreciated it or not. I walked out of Meridian for what I thought was the final time, my head held high. Unexpected ally. By noon, my phone was buzzing constantly. By 2 o'clock, local news outlets were reporting that OSHA investigators had arrived at Meridian for an unscheduled inspection. By 4 o'clock, I received an email from someone I hadn't heard from in years. Dr. Margaret Sullivan herself. Ellen, it read, I've been contacted by the ethics board regarding your report. I always knew you were the moral compass of my laboratory. Would you be willing to meet? There may be more that needs to be brought to light. 2 days later, I sat across from Dr. Sullivan at her modest home in the historic district of Toledo. At 76, she still possessed the sharp analytical mind that had built Meridian from nothing. Her living room was lined with books and academic journals, family photos competing for space with framed scientific awards. They've suspended all research activities pending investigation, she informed me, pouring tea into delicate cups. OSHA found exactly what you said they would. As we talked, I revealed what I had discovered about the NIH grant rejection. It wasn't my compliance issues that had caused the rejection. It was the statistically impossible data in Patterson's trials that had raised red flags with reviewers. Harlow knew this, I explained. He needed a scapegoat, and I was the perfect target. Dr. Sullivan set her teacup down with a decisive click. In my day, women scientists had to be twice as rigorous, twice as ethical as our male counterparts just to be taken seriously. We faced constant scrutiny, constant doubt. She reached across the table and took my hand. What you've done, standing up for scientific integrity at great personal cost, is the very essence of what Meridian was founded upon. Her words touched me more than I expected. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt tears threatening. Thank you, I managed. That means a great deal coming from you. New beginnings. A week later, I received a call from Dr. Catherine Matthews at the University of Chicago. Dr. Sullivan suggested I contact you. We're looking for someone to oversee research ethics and compliance training. Would you be interested? The interview went remarkably well. I left with a formal job offer, Director of Research Integrity and Compliance Training. Meanwhile, the situation at Meridian continued to unravel. OSHA issued citations for 27 violations. Dr. Patterson broke under questioning, providing investigators with emails that implicated Harlow and extended the trail of deception up to Axiom's executives. Soon after, William Thornton, Meridian's board chairman, called offering reinstatement and compensation. I declined but agreed to consult during their transition. The most powerful form of redemption, I told Amy that night on the phone, isn't about getting even. It's about helping rebuild what was broken, but on better foundations. Back to the congressional hearing, and in your professional opinion, asked the committee member, bringing me back to the present. How prevalent are these practices in the industry? More common than we like to admit, I answer honestly. The pressure to secure funding and produce marketable results can override scientific integrity. That's why we need stronger whistleblower protections and more rigorous oversight. As I step down from the witness stand, Dr. Sullivan is waiting. She squeezes my hand and whispers, "You've done more than expose one lab's wrongdoing. You've sparked a national conversation about scientific ethics." Epilogue. 1 year later, I stand at a podium in the University of Chicago's largest lecture hall, addressing a packed audience. The topic: ethical guardianship, maintaining integrity in scientific research. In the front row sits Amy, now in her final year of pre-med studies. Pride wells up in my chest. The pressures you will face in your careers are real, I tell the audience. Funding constraints, publication demands, corporate interests. But the moment you compromise scientific integrity is the moment you stop being a scientist and become something else entirely. After the lecture, Jason approaches. Professor Morgan, he greets me with a broad smile. "How are things at Meridian?" I ask. "Completely different," he replies. "We're smaller now, but the work feels honest again. And I've been accepted to the research program here. I was hoping you might serve as my advisor." I smile, remembering the young man who stood by me when others turned away. "I'd be honored, Jason." That evening, back in my apartment, I hang up the navy blue blazer, the same one I wore on my first day at Meridian, the day I was fired, and the day I testified before Congress. Now it represents not what I lost, but what I found, the courage to stand for truth, regardless of the cost. At 57, I had discovered that it's never too late to start again. Sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of a better one. I watch through my office window as Diana Frost's confident stride falters when she approaches our front door. 6 months ago, she sat across from me in that sterile gray conference room, her voice crisp and detached as she announced they were cutting my salary by 30%. "It's purely business," she had said. Now, she hesitates before entering Bridgewater Family Dental, my dental practice, standing directly next to the one she helped destroy. Her polished corporate appearance can't mask the defeat in her posture. Through the Venetian blinds, I see her straighten her shoulders, preparing to swallow her pride. The satisfaction I feel isn't quite what I expected. It's not the sharp, vindictive pleasure I imagined during those sleepless nights after their compensation adjustment announcement. Instead, it's something deeper, the quiet validation that comes from proving your worth, not just to others, but to yourself. My receptionist's voice comes through the intercom. "Miss Frost is here to see you." I take a deep breath and straighten the framed photo on my desk, a picture from our grand opening 4 months ago. Patients and staff gathered around me and Dr. Bradley, all smiles. "Send her in," I reply. At 50 years old, I never expected to be rewriting my life story. But sometimes, the chapters others tried to end become the beginning of something far more meaningful. Flashback, the announcement. "We need to adjust your compensation to industry standards, 30% less with no bonuses moving forward," Diana announced 3 months after Southwest Dental Partners acquired Sunrise Dental. Her voice was crisp and detached as she straightened the papers in front of her. "It's purely business." Richard nodded beside her, not quite meeting my eyes. "The corporate office has done extensive analysis on administrative compensation. This brings you in line with national averages. I sat across from them in the newly remodeled conference room, walls freshly painted in sterile gray that matched their corporate branding. Gone was the warm southwestern coral that Dr. Harrison and I had chosen together 15 years ago, the color that made nervous patients feel at ease. This is what 18 years of dedication amounts to, a spreadsheet calculation. The thought flashed through my mind, but my face remained carefully neutral. The same professional mask I'd worn through thousands of patient interactions over the past 18 years. I'll need to review the terms carefully, I replied, taking the folder they slid across the table. My hands didn't shake, though something inside me certainly did. Of course, Diana said with a thin smile, clearly relieved I hadn't made a scene. We'll need your decision by Friday. Walking back to my office, past the new sleek furniture that had replaced our comfortable waiting room chairs, I felt strangely hollow. The practice I'd helped build from a struggling two-chair operation into a thriving business with 6 treatment rooms and over 3,000 loyal patients was becoming unrecognizable. Samantha, Dr. Harrison had said during my interview 18 years ago, I can teach anyone about dental procedures and insurance codes. What I can't teach is how to genuinely care about people. He'd seen something in me that these corporate representatives clearly didn't value. To them, I was just another expense to minimize. Flashback. Early years. I was 32 when Dr. Harrison hired me, a single mother with a 6-year-old daughter and a fresh divorce. I had administrative experience but knew nothing about dentistry. What I did know was how to connect with people. Mom, why do we have to move again? Olivia had asked, her small hands clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit as we carried boxes into our modest apartment. Because we're starting something new, sweetheart, I'd answered, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Something better. My own mother had raised 3 children while working 2 jobs after my father left. Never depend on anyone else for your security, Samantha, she told me repeatedly. I'd broken that rule once by marrying David, who turned out to be more interested in his freedom than fatherhood. I wouldn't make that mistake again. Dr. Harrison's practice was barely getting by when I started. The waiting room had mismatched furniture, the scheduling system was a disaster, and patients frequently waited over an hour to be seen. Within 6 months, I'd reorganized everything from filing to patient flow. By year 2, we had doubled our patient base. I don't know how you remember everyone's names and stories, Dr. Harrison had said one evening as we reviewed the week's schedule. I just listen, I'd replied. But it was more than that. I knew which patients needed extra time because of anxiety. I remembered whose children were in college and who had grandchildren graduating. I learned which families struggled financially and found ways to work with insurance companies to maximize their benefits. When elderly patients couldn't drive, I arranged transportation. These weren't just patients. They were Mrs. Robinson, who brought homemade cookies every Friday, Mr. Abernathy, who always told the same joke about flossing, the Chen family, who drove 40 minutes because their daughter felt comfortable only with our hygienist. Year by year, patient by patient, I helped build Sunrise Dental into a community institution. And now, watching Richard examining the waiting room with a critical eye, measuring everything against some corporate template, I felt like I was watching someone dismantle my home. The seed of change back at my desk, I opened my drawer and pulled out the business card I'd received 2 weeks earlier at the regional dental conference. Dr. Michael Bradley had approached me during the lunch break. Your reputation precedes you, he'd said, extending his hand. I've heard wonderful things about how Sunrise Dental operates or operated before the corporate takeover. Something in his directness had caught my attention. Unlike the polite, superficial conversations that filled these conferences, his words held genuine interest. If you ever consider making a change, he had said, handing me his card, I'd love to discuss some ideas with you. I tucked the card away then, more out of politeness than interest. Now, I turned it over in my hands, feeling its embossed lettering. I picked up my phone and dialed the number. 3 hours later, we sat in a quiet corner of Wildflower Bread Company, away from the lunch crowd. Michael Bradley at 45 had the confident demeanor of someone who knew his worth, something I'd begun to question about myself. They want to cut my salary by 30%, I explained, stirring my coffee absently. No more performance bonuses, either. Dr. Bradley nodded thoughtfully. Unfortunately, that's becoming standard practice when corporate groups acquire independent dental offices. They see administrative staff as an expense to minimize, not an asset to value. He'd spent the past decade working for various dental groups, but had grown increasingly frustrated with corporate dentistry's approach. I've been saving to open my own practice, he continued, leaning forward slightly. Something smaller, more patient-focused. The kind of place where we know every patient by name, not by production value. That sounds like what Sunrise used to be, I said, unable to keep the wistfulness from my voice. Exactly, and that's why I wanted to talk with you. His eyes held mine steadily. Samantha, I've asked around. Everyone in the Chandler dental community knows you're the one who really built Sunrise. Dr. Harrison was an excellent dentist, but you created the experience that kept patients coming back. I felt my cheeks warm at the unexpected praise. We were a team you coordinated, he insisted. I'd like to propose a partnership of sorts. I have the clinical skills and some capital, but I need someone who understands how to build and maintain a thriving practice. He paused, watching my reaction carefully. Someone like you. I blinked. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you equity, he clarified. 20% ownership in the new practice, with a salary comparable to what you were making before the cut. I don't just need an office manager. I need a partner. The idea was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. After 18 years of security, the thought of starting fresh made my stomach tighten with anxiety. Yet, beneath that fear was something else. Something that felt remarkably like hope. I don't know, Dr. Bradley. Starting a new practice from scratch. Not from scratch, he interrupted gently. With your experience and community connections, with your understanding of what patients in this area need and want. He stirred his iced tea, considering his words. Southwest Dental would see it as direct competition. His smile contained a hint of challenge. They should. On the drive back to Sunrise, my mind raced with possibilities and concerns. The practical side of me listed all the reasons to simply accept the pay cut. Job security, familiar surroundings, no disruption to my comfortable routine. I'm 50 years old, I thought. Is this really the time to take such a risk? Yet, as I pulled into the parking lot and saw the new corporate signage that had replaced our familiar Sunrise Dental logo, something hardened inside me. This wasn't just about money. It was about 18 years of dedication being reduced to a line item on a corporate balance sheet. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Bradley. No pressure, but the vacant office space next to Sunrise just became available. Perfect location. Just saying. I couldn't help but laugh at the audacity and the perfect poetic justice of his suggestion. The decision, you're considering what? Olivia stared at me across our kitchen table, her fork suspended midway to her mouth. At 28, she inherited my practicality and caution, which made her reaction to my news entirely predictable. Opening a new dental practice with Dr. Bradley, I repeated, trying to sound more confident than I felt, as a partner, not just an employee. Mom, you've worked at Sunrise for nearly 2 decades. You're talking about competing directly against your former employer. Isn't that, I don't know, risky? I poured more iced tea into our glasses, buying time to organize my thoughts. Our Sunday dinners had always been a safe space for honest conversation, and I needed that now more than ever. It's definitely risky, I acknowledged. But staying at Sunrise means accepting that my 18 years of service are worth 30% less than they were 3 months ago. Olivia's expression softened. I get that it's insulting, but starting a business at 50, next door to your current workplace. That seems extreme, even for you. I smiled. Really? Even for predictable, play it safe Samantha Martin? You know what I mean. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I just don't want to see you get hurt, professionally or financially. Her concern was valid. I'd spent my adult life making careful, measured decisions. After her father left when she was 6, I'd prioritized stability above all else. Our modest home was nearly paid off. My retirement account was growing steadily. I'd established a comfortable, if not exciting, life. I've been thinking about your grandfather a lot lately, I said, surprising myself with the direction my thoughts had taken. Mom's dad? The one who owned the hardware store. I nodded. He worked for someone else for 20 years before taking the risk to open his own place. Everyone told him he was crazy to start over at 48. I smiled at the memory. He always said his only regret was not doing it sooner. The parallel hadn't occurred to me until just now, but it felt significant. My grandfather had passed away when Olivia was still a toddler, but his quiet determination had shaped my childhood. Perhaps it had shaped more than I realized. I've been doing some research, I said, pulling a folder from the sideboard drawer. Dr. Bradley has excellent credentials and a solid reputation. The location is perfect. Patients wouldn't even have to change their driving route. I opened the folder to reveal spreadsheets I'd spent the weekend creating. Even with conservative estimates for patient transfer, we could be profitable within 9 months. Olivia raised an eyebrow, impressed despite herself. You've really thought this through. I have, I admitted. But there's something else. I took a deep breath. This isn't just about money, Olivia. It's about standing up for myself, for the first time in a very long time. She studied me for a moment, then a slow smile spread across her face. You know, you remind me of Grandpa right now. It was possibly the best compliment she could have given me. The resignation. The following morning, I requested a meeting with Richard and Diana. They seemed surprised by my calm demeanor as I settled into a chair across from them. I've reviewed your compensation adjustment proposal, I began, using their corporate terminology. Unfortunately, I won't be accepting the new terms. Richard's relief was visible. I'm glad you're being reasonable, Samantha. The transition will be much smoother with your cooperation. I think you misunderstand, I interrupted gently. I'm not accepting the terms because I'm resigning. The stunned silence that followed gave me a small, satisfying glimpse of what was to come. Resigning? Diana recovered first. Where would you go? You've been here your entire career. I'll be helping establish a new dental practice, I replied simply. Richard's expression darkened. Samantha, I remind you that your employment contract includes a non-compete clause. I smiled, feeling oddly liberated. I reviewed that with an attorney yesterday. The clause was in Dr. Harrison's original contract, but the terms weren't transferred properly when Southwest Dental took over. It's unenforceable. This wasn't entirely accurate. There was some legal gray area, but the momentary panic on their faces was worth the small deception. You can't seriously be considering competing against us, Diana said. After everything this practice has done for you. The words hit me like a physical blow, breaking through the professional veneer I'd maintained throughout my career. Everything this practice has done for me? I repeated, my voice finally betraying a hint of the anger I'd been suppressing. I built this practice. I'm not competing against Sunrise. I'm reclaiming what I helped create. I thought about the evenings I'd stayed late to help frighten patients, the birthdays I'd missed because of office emergencies, the countless small ways I'd poured my life into making this place succeed. All reduced to a percentage cut on a spreadsheet. As I stood to leave, Richard's voice took on a threatening edge. The corporate office won't take this lightly. They have resources you can't imagine. I paused at the door, thinking of the generations of patients who trusted me, who knew me as the face of Sunrise Dental. And I have relationships you can't replace. Walking out, I felt lighter than I had in months. The decision had been made. The path forward was clear, even if it wasn't certain. For the first time in decades, I was putting myself first. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. I worked my notice period at Sunrise with scrupulous professionalism, training my replacement, a nervous 24-year-old named Ashley with a business degree but no dental experience. Meanwhile, I helped Dr. Bradley, Michael, as he insisted I call him, secure the lease on the adjacent office space. The irony wasn't lost on me. During the day, I maintained Sunrise's scheduling system and patient records. In the evenings, I designed a competing system for what would become Bridgewater Family Dental. Do you think they suspect anything? Michael asked one night as we reviewed floor plans for the new space. They know I'm leaving to work with another dental practice, I replied. They just don't know where yet. He grinned. The location is going to be quite a shock. It's a practical business decision, I said, echoing the corporate language Richard and Diana had used so often. The demographic analysis supports it. In truth, The proximity was both practical and personal. Practical because it would make the transition seamless for patients who decided to follow me. Personal because, yes, I wanted Richard and Diana to see exactly what they had discarded. My final day at Sunrise arrived with little fanfare. Richard and Diana had grown increasingly cold as my departure approached, minimizing their interactions with me. The staff, sensing the tension, had organized a small farewell gathering during lunch. "We'll miss you, Samantha," Rachel said, handing me a card signed by everyone. "It won't be the same without you." I hugged her tightly. "I'll miss all of you too." I hesitated, then added carefully, "If any of you ever need anything, I'm not going far." Later, as I packed the personal items from my desk, Diana appeared in my doorway. "Samantha, I hope you understand this was never personal," she said, attempting a conciliatory tone. "The compensation adjustments were based on corporate guidelines." I looked up from the box of family photos and thank you cards I'd accumulated over 18 years. "That's the problem, Diana. Dentistry is inherently personal. These aren't just patient files. They're people who've trusted us with their health, their fears, and their families for years." She sighed. "The dental landscape is changing. Small practices can't compete with corporate efficiency and purchasing power. Whatever you're planning, it won't work." I closed the box and stood. "Perhaps, but I'm not trying to compete with corporate dentistry. I'm simply offering an alternative." As I carried my belongings to my car, I spotted Mrs. Robinson, the 82-year-old patient who faithfully brought cookies every Friday, struggling with the new automatic doors that had replaced our manual ones. "Let me help you," I said, setting down my box to assist her. "Oh, Samantha, thank goodness," she said, patting my arm gratefully. "Everything's changing so quickly around here. First, those uncomfortable new chairs, then that complicated check-in computer." She lowered her voice. "And they told me they're discontinuing the emergency senior appointments. What am I supposed to do if my bridge comes loose on a weekend?" I helped her inside, feeling a fresh surge of determination. "Actually, Mrs. Robinson, I'm making some changes myself. May I call you next week to tell you about them?" That evening, I drove by what would soon be Bridgewater Family Dental. The space was still empty, awaiting construction, but the "coming soon" sign had been installed that afternoon. From the parking lot, it was clearly visible from Sunrise's front windows. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Just drove by the future office. Bold move, Mom. I'm proud of you." For the first time since Richard and Diana had announced my compensation adjustment, I felt completely certain I was doing the right thing. Not just for my career or my finances, but for my self-respect. The real work was just beginning. The opening day at Bridgewater Family Dental exceeded even my most optimistic projections. We had scheduled 20 patient appointments, a reasonable number for a first day of operations. But the waiting room was consistently full as people dropped by to see the new office and welcome me to my new role. We designed the space to feel warm and inviting, comfortable Southwestern-inspired furniture, local artwork on the walls, a play area for children that didn't feel like an afterthought. Everything Sunrise used to be before the corporate makeover. By lunchtime, we had scheduled 47 additional appointments for the coming weeks. By day's end, that number had risen to 83. "This is unprecedented," Michael said as we reviewed the day's numbers. "I've never seen a new practice generate this kind of immediate response." I smiled, thinking of the 18 years of relationships that had created this moment. It's not about the practice. It's about trust. From my new office, I could see directly into Sunrise's waiting room, now conspicuously empty. Throughout the day, I'd spotted Diana watching our bustling reception area, her expression growing increasingly concerned. At 5 p.m., Ashley, my replacement at Sunrise, appeared at our front desk, looking nervous. "Hi, Samantha," she said hesitantly. "I was wondering, do you need another administrative assistant? They're talking about letting me go. Apparently, the patient's schedule is underperforming expectations." "3 weeks into the job?" I asked, though I wasn't really surprised. She nodded miserably. "Richard says it's my fault for not maintaining patient retention, but they keep changing the systems and cutting appointment times. Mrs. Robinson yelled at me yesterday when I told her we couldn't accommodate her emergency visit." I thought for a moment. We hadn't budgeted for additional administrative staff yet, but Ashley deserved better than being scapegoated for Richard and Diana's failures. We can start you part-time, I offered, with the possibility of full-time as we grow. The relief on her face made any financial strain worth it. Thank you, Samantha. I promise I'll work hard. As Ashley left, Rachel approached with another stack of records transfer requests. 39 more today, she reported. At this rate, we'll have half of Sunrise's patients by the end of the month. I picked up the stack, each form representing a person who had chosen to follow me rather than remain with the practice that had decided I was expendable. It's not about revenge, I said, though the satisfaction I felt suggested otherwise. It's about building something better. But watching Diana's frustrated expression through the window, I couldn't deny the sweet sense of justice unfolding. 6 months later, 6 months after Bridgewater Family Dental opened its doors, we had exceeded every benchmark in our business plan. What had begun as a risky venture had transformed into a thriving practice with over 2,000 patients, more than two-thirds of them transferred from Sunrise. The impact on our neighbor was impossible to ignore. Through the dental community grapevine, we heard that Southwest Dental Partners was considering selling the underperforming location. Richard had already been reassigned to another practice in Phoenix, and Diana was desperately trying to rebuild patient relationships that had deteriorated under her management. They're offering significant discounts to prevent more patients from leaving, Michael mentioned one morning as we reviewed our weekly schedule. Apparently, corporate isn't happy with the quarterly numbers. I nodded, unsurprised. Discounts won't solve their fundamental problem. Patients don't want to be processed like products on an assembly line. The difference between our approaches was evident in every aspect of our operations. While Sunrise now rushed patients through abbreviated appointments, we maintained comfortable scheduling that allowed for genuine interaction. Where they emphasized efficiency metrics, we focused on patient satisfaction and health outcomes. Mrs. Robinson now brought her famous cookies to Bridgewater every Friday, and we had reinstated the emergency senior appointments that had meant so much to our older patients. That Tuesday afternoon, I was reviewing our monthly projections when I saw Diana through my window, approaching our practice with determined steps. This time, unlike her confident stride from months ago, there was a hesitancy in her movement. And so we've come full circle, I thought. Present day, the conversation. Do you have a minute? Diana asks, standing uncertainly in my office doorway, her usual confidence noticeably absent. Of course, I reply, gesturing to the chair across from me. She sits down, hands fidgeting in her lap. I notice she looks tired, the corporate polish somewhat dimmed. I wanted to ask. She begins, then pauses, seeming to struggle with her pride. How did you do it? How did you build such patient loyalty? The question seems sincere, almost desperate. For a moment, I'm tempted to savor this victory, to let her feel the full weight of her miscalculation. But looking at her now, I find that impulse fading. 18 years of treating people like people, not profit centers, I answer honestly. There's no corporate template for that. Diana nods slowly. I'm being transferred next week. The regional manager said Sunrise's performance decline is unprecedented in the company's history. I could respond with satisfaction or smugness, but seeing her genuine distress, I feel an unexpected pang of empathy. I'm sorry it didn't work out. Don't be, she says, rising to leave. You proved your point. I just wish we had recognized your value before it was too late. As she walks away, I realize that the victory I'd been savoring isn't about seeing Sunrise struggle. It's about creating a practice where both patients and staff can thrive. The revenge I sought has transformed into something more meaningful: validation. Over dinner that night, Olivia studies me with curious eyes. You seem different, Mom. Happier. I consider this as I refill our water glasses. I am. For years, I defined myself by my loyalty to Sunrise. When that wasn't valued, I thought I'd lost part of my identity. I smile, feeling the truth of my next words. But it turns out I didn't lose anything. I found something better: my own voice. Olivia raises her glass in a toast. To finding your voice at 50. I clink my glass against hers, thinking about the journey of the past year, from longtime employee to business owner, from taking directions to making decisions. from security to risk to newfound confidence. Looking back at the path that led me here, I realized that Richard and Diana's attempt to diminish my worth had actually revealed my true value, not just to Sunrise, but to myself. Their business decision had become my personal awakening, and for that, I am strangely grateful. The 30% pay cut they tried to impose had led to a 100% transformation in how I valued my own contributions. In the end, their purely business decision had taught me the most personal lesson of all. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't getting even, it's moving forward.